guys, welcome back to the channel on the next episode of, the next installment of Project Vulcan. I guess the first proper, tuning installment of Project Vulcan. How to tune springs and the ride height. You remember from the last video that we drove the car completely stock, no setup tuning. It was terrible, wasn't it? It was understeered into the corner, oversteered out. Overall, felt wallowy and generally just not cut out to be the the hypercar that we've got in front of us. So in this video, I'll show you one of the techniques that I use for helping to start a tune from scratch. Something I call neutralizing the car. What effect changing the spring stiffness or ratio has on a car, and probably do some sort of laps to demonstrate that, and lastly, why and what ride height has an effect on. So first up, neutralizing the car. Very simple. I like to add full aero. Most of these cars are going to have full aero, so we might as well start with it. We can take some off later if we need to, and set almost all of the settings roughly to the middle, or at least the same back and front. Why do we do this? Well, because when we start from a Forza stock tune, we're essentially starting from someone else's tune that we're going to edit, one that's been made in the factory, if you like. So we need to start from a neutral position and set up and assess the car, from our thoughts, not someone else's. And the first change that I like to make, as you may have guessed from the title, is to the springs. So we'll just make these last few changes here quite even, and then we'll go and drive the car. Something I get asked quite a lot of the time, really, actually, when I'm talking to friends and people asking me about tuning is what difference springs actually make. Surely if they're the same front and back, you'll be fine. Or if you want to set the car up for oversteer, have the front spring all the way down. It's not quite as simple as that, I'm afraid. There's two main elements I think that contribute to it. The first one is weight transfer, which for me is quite an important one. There's two types, front and back, and then side to side. Obviously, front to back is during the braking phase. If you've got too soft a spring on the front, the car's going to pitch forward. The rake is going to change, affecting the mechanical grip at the back, putting the front tyres under more pressure. And actually, in real life, I'm sure it happens on Forza, it totally affects the aerodynamics of the car as well. Lateral to side, obviously every car has body roll. The rigidity of a car is something that is talked about quite a lot, and the lateral forces are gonna compress the suspension and put pressure on the outside of the tyres. Obviously, stiffer springs reduce body roll. It's unique to each car, hence why one setup doesn't work for this Vulcan and say a Mini, but it does tend to be transferable within a class, i.e. if we go and try this on Ferrari FXXK, what we do on this car may well work for that car, or at least give you a starting place. And I guess with the weight transfer, as a rule of thumb, if the car is set up for understeer, the front spring is going to be higher than the rear. Obviously, the opposite is going to cause oversteer. The second main thing about springs and tuning the suspension is, I'm not sure what the technical term for this is, I guess you could call it bounciness of the car. If the springs are too stiff and you go over bumps, curbs that are harsh, it may cause the tyres to lose contact with the road. I'm thinking tracks like Prague, Rio, and I guess the other extreme of that is think sort of American muscle car bouncing along the road. But I think in this situation with our Vulcan, because we're it's so low and we run the risk of scraping the floor, I think we'll probably end up with quite a stiff setup. Okay, so what's our aim? We need to find a balance between keeping body roll to a minimum, keeping all four tyres in contact with the road, obviously. Simple, eh? But as I said, because I think there's not too many curbs on this track which are going to upset us, I think we're going to end up with quite a stiff suspension setup. We're driving the car now for a couple of minutes, one other bit laps, and the first lap was a very neutral setup. We had 750, I think, on both the front and the rear. It felt okay. It wasn't ideal, but it felt quite composed. So immediately from that, we can tell that the car is quite a neutral setup car. We're not going to have too many extremes. Aston Martin have done a good job, out of the factory, or so Forza have, represented it. We're now onto a really soft front and back screen, and we can just tell now that it feels wallowy, and you can see the car step out there. Just it's the weight transfer is bobbling the car around, and it's making it difficult to keep a consistent line through the corners, because sometimes the front wheels grip, sometimes the rear wheels grip. It seems silly to say, but the rears don't always want to follow the front wheel. So as soon as you put the power down, the rear just grips and it oversteers, like we've just seen there. So I finished the lap off with this. I don't really want to drive any more of this soft setup, because I think it's definitely not the way to go. Like I sort of predicted, I think we're going to need a stiff setup, but I did want to show you the sort of compromise of having a softer spring. I think we'll do maybe soft at the front and stiff at the rear next, to give you a good comparison between the two sort of setups, if you like. I think we need to raise the front spring a little bit anyway, even to keep it soft, if you like, because it was really digging in the front end and then biting at all the wrong places. So to give you any kind of sort of representative test, then I think we just need to raise that a little bit. So we've got over 1,000 on the rear spring. So what I'm going to predict here is the front end's going to bite, and the back end is just going to want to swing round. It won't be so obvious because we've got traction control on. Probably make it more obvious by turning that off. Run over that bollard. Oh, straight away, there we go. Back end just wants to fly around because the front end bites. The back end wants to try and overtake it because it's so stiff, and the wheels just lose grip straight away compared to it. There is one way you can tell this without maybe looking at the car and just the telemetry, and that's the sort of friction, the tyres, and also there's another diagram which we can go into another video of a little bit more detail. I don't want to go into too much in a minute, but basically the telemetry goes red, and it's obvious when the friction is too much. Enough of that, because that's not the way forward straight away. So let's swap them around. Let's do really high on the front. Stick it up to 1,000, and really low on the rear. Predictions: the complete opposite. We won't turn anywhere near as much as we might have done. On the neutral setup, we had sort of 750 on the front and the back. But having a stiff front spring is a great way to stabilise the car. I quite like, once I've been through this process, or if I'm tweaking someone else's tune and it's a little bit, oversteery, put the front spring up to sort of stabilise the car. That back end still has the grip from the softer spring, so it sort of squats coming out of corners. But that front spring it makes it quite adjustable when you use it sort of in collaboration with some of the other settings, which we'll talk about that in another episode, where using other areas of the tune to help with tuning the springs and damping and stuff like that. It seems okay. It's understeering quite a bit like predicted, actually. Again, sort of immediately feel that this isn't unlocking the full potential for this car. Right, a little bit, I think. But not too bad. Back end sort of swept around quite nicely there, actually. But you can tell straight away it's not unlocking the full sort of potential of this car. So I think the neutral, or the same back to front, is the way to go for this car. Driving with traction control, I mentioned last episode, it's slightly different from driving without traction as well. You can rely on the traction. We need the back end of the car to rotate round, and that lends itself nicely to having a stiffer rear spring, actually. So I think if anything, depending on how this goes, we may end up stiffening the rear spring even further. Seeing there, driven straight off the track, although that was my fault, not the cars. In fact, actually, first impressions are that we could probably go stiffer on the front and the back. see how we go for a little bit. Like I said though, you know, the back end of the car really does need a stiffer spring. I think I'll put both of them up, even stiffer. Why not? Might as well try it. That's part of the thing with tuning. You know, if we'd stopped when we had 750 pressure on the front and the rear springs, then yeah, that's okay. Let's go for that. You know, we wouldn't be discovering what we're discovering now and sort of improving the tune. That was interesting, just there over that curb. Might be a bit of an issue with the ride height. Now we are running such a stiff spring, you know, that bounciness element comes into play. If we do run over a curb that upsets the car, we may well, you know, lose. You know, that wheel's going to come off the ground, so we need to keep an eye out for that, I think. But for the time being, it feels okay. I think, yeah, as I said, I will raise both the springs. It says hop over these, Sally. Yeah, get over. But I think the rears need raising slightly more. Although let's just floor it out of here, see how we get on. See, actually that hooks up really nicely, and you can see again there that curb sort of upset the car with the current sort of rebound and bump damping. But we'll get to that in another episode. Anyway, as I'm raising that spring, I guess that the second half of the video is one we won't spend too much time on, just the basics, and that's ride height. Obviously it's on the same screen as the suspension, but it's not something people change a lot in Forza. You know, I certainly don't. A lot of the people I tend to tune with and chat with don't too much. But I guess in real life there's sort of three elements to the ride height. The big one for me is centre of gravity. The lower the car, you know, the less, the lower the centre of gravity, the more grip you're going to have, the less lateral weight transfer, like we talked about earlier. Second one, optimising the balance between downforce and drag. You know, there's always an ideal ride height for aero. Not such a big deal in Forza. Most of the time, lower is better. Although if you do have a track with a really long straight, say Le Mans or Nürburgring, probably not Nürburgring because a lot of corners, but let's take Le Mans. Forza does like a high front ride height. It increases the top speed. It's a bit of a Forzaism, if you like. The third one, not really relevant for Forza. Forza most of the time, ground clearance along the bounciness lines. You know, tracks like Prague, Rio de Janeiro, definitely consider raising, you know, both the front and the back of the car, because otherwise it's just going to be totally you're going to hit every bump. I tend to find that if the rear has a high ride height, like you saw earlier in this lap, you get that floaty feeling. It just makes the car feel horrible and unpredictable. Whereas if you've got the front quite high, like we've just been driving there, it's quite understeery, slow to respond, or like that word, wallowy. The best one is if you've got, you know, soft suspension and that front ride height up. You're going to be doing wheelies, which is quite fun. We could do a lap time test here if we wanted, but at this stage for me it's more about the feel of the car. If you want to go ahead and try one, let me know in the comments how you get on. That would be great. A reminder that we have just only changed the springs at first, and they'll probably change again as we change the rest of the setup. You know, every part works together, and that relationship is something that, you know, the differing elements is something you'll get to know, you know, as we tune together more. So for this one, next episode we'll be concentrating on something that goes hand in hand with the springs, but it's often confused with them: the damping. It's quite an interesting one. But for the time being, I've been Matt from ZimdogTuning. Thanks for watching. Hope this video was informative and has helped you know, a little bit. Make sure you hit the subscribe button below, give the video a like, and leave any comments. Bye for now.